I feel like Kody and Robyn probably have some plan of what they want to do and how they want to handle it. I think that Janelle has some sort of plan.
What goes on when the cameras roll off, but the truth won't keep still? When the fairy tale marriage starts to crumble behind closed doors? When silence, once a sign of strength, becomes surrender? This is a tale of a secret tape, a broken illusion, and the fall of a reality TV empire. This is the moment Sister Wives became a battleground, and the microphones never fell silent. The crew was wrapping up. Shooting was complete. Boom mics were stored, lights went dark, and the production trucks were leaving the cul-de-sac. It was all supposed to be done, but it wasn't. A little mic clipped under Cody Brown's shirt had been overlooked. It was still live, still capturing. What it captured was never intended to find an audience. Cody leaned against the couch as if 20 years weighed on his shoulders. His shirt was untucked halfway, and his body language yelled defeat. He massaged his temples before mumbling softly, "This whole thing is disgusting." Robyn stood stock still in the other room, her arms tightly crossed. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. "What did you just say?" Cody didn't raise his head. "Living this way? The pretense, the deceit, you and me, all of us," he growled, as if he was spewing out something vile. It was the moment the facade crumbled. Robyn blinked in surprise. She shifted back a step, as if his words had struck her physically. "So you're blaming me now?" she asked with a sharp, taut tone. Cody's tone didn't rise, but it cut like a knife. "You twist everything. You cry, then manipulate, and I'm the one choking on it." It wasn't anger. It was worse. Something colder. Fatigue combined with honesty. The sort of truth that escapes when there's no longer energy to continue lying. And all of it, every utterance, was still being recorded. Unfiltered, unscripted, humiliating. But that wasn't the only way Robyn was betrayed by sound. Later that evening, in the privacy of her bedroom, she unburdened herself to a trusted producer, entirely unaware that an unseen backup recorder on the shelf beside her was still operating. Her tone was altered, no longer coached for the cameras. This time her voice trembled with rage. "He actually called me," she sobbed, then stopped. Her grief turned instantly into something acuter. Janelle's out there playing martyr and claiming to be some pioneer woman. And Meri? She's a tragic Victorian ghost. This wasn't all emotional venting. It was planned. It was vicious. The Robyn fans had believed was disappearing, replaced by a resentful and calculating person. She prowled the room, ranting about being the only one still attending, the only one keeping the family together, the only one Cody should have fought for. "They should give me credit," she snarled. "I kept this entire circus together." She laughed, but it was mocking, a sound designed to mask something tainted. That recording, now officially dubbed Clip 14-Do Not Delete, somehow came into the possession of a retired show editor. No note, no return envelope, just a plain envelope and a flash drive. Curiosity was translated to shock. In hours, the full recording was spilling onto Reddit and all over the internet. By dawn, fans were no longer speculating. They were hearing. Robyn unfiltered, mocking the women she had once referred to as sisters. The mask was removed. The truth was out. And now that they'd heard it, they couldn't unhear it. Janelle didn't need the entire clip to get it. She'd lived it. But the sound of Robyn referring to her as a martyr with a complex, that resonated differently, because that was what Robyn would say when she thought nobody else was around. Alone in her kitchen, her hands shaking, Janelle replayed. She laughed this time, not because it was hilarious, but because it was freeing. Years of denied insight suddenly became prophecy. She had seen it coming. She had watched Cody come apart, watched Robyn take her place in his sphere, watched herself and the others being pushed to the breaking point. Now the truth would have a voice, and that voice was louder than ever before. The cameras were meant to turn off, but destiny had other plans. Now everyone in the world knows what actually occurred when the lights went out and the masks were stripped off. This was not an episode like any other. This was the fall of a legacy, documented on video by the very mediums designed to preserve it. What do you believe? Was it fate, sabotage, or was this merely the truth not wanting to be left behind? Leave your feedback in the comments. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because this tale is only just beginning. The wreckage was unmistakable, but this wasn't about love lost. This wasn't about heartbreak. It was about control, and the moment that illusion finally fell apart, not even Robyn, Kody's so-called chosen one, was exempt from his repulsion anymore. Over state lines, the phone rang. No hello, only one loaded question, pregnant with emotion. Have you heard it? And Janelle didn't have to query what it meant. They were finally on the same page. Years they had both sacrificed, some out in the open, some not, but always made in the belief that the family could still exist, that their devotion counted for something. But the illusion was over, dead. Christine was done pretending, done apologizing, done sitting back and watching Robyn sob on demand while pulling the strings behind it all. The mask had slipped, and beneath it they saw the same thing. A woman who never had been truly one of them, just someone who had acted long enough to amass power. At the same time, in Parowan, Meri glared at a printed transcript as if it were a gravestone. Robyn's words weren't cruel, degrading, final. For years, Meri had clung to hope that if she lingered long enough, faithful enough, she'd be noticed once more. But being referred to as a tragic Victorian ghost wasn't merely humiliating. It was erasure, and something inside of her snapped, not with drama, but with precision. Meri came to understand she did not require a family that erased her behind closed doors. She needed to pass through one, and at last shut them behind her. Nobody thought the fallout would go public, but it did, and when it did, it landed online like a bomb. The leaked recording, unedited and incriminating, was posted anonymously, but ran wider than any TLC promo ever had. Reddit forums detonated. Instagram reels cycled Kody's voice, labeling Robyn ick, over images of her wiping away tears on camera. What had previously been meticulously staged drama turned into something more sinister, truth, unplanned, and the audience wasn't merely observing anymore. They were joining dots, posting timestamps, overwhelming comment sections with anger that felt intimate. The facade had slipped, and no level of PR shine could repair it. Behind TLC's boardrooms, panic reigned. Lawyers conspired about NDAs and breach clauses. But the producers, they saw gold. One executive grumbled, "We don't need a script anymore." This is the story. While on background, a one-time editor grudgingly confessed he had leaked the recording. Through a burner handle, not for revenge, but relief. The weight of knowing too much and saying nothing had finally gotten to him. What he released wasn't audio, it was accountability. In Flagstaff, Janelle's group text with her kids flashed, messages, links, screenshots. Even the little ones, those normally exempt from the worst of the drama, were viewing now. Gabe, normally reserved, sent only one message. He really said it. It wasn't shock. It was confirmation. Decades of being pushed aside, ignored, forgotten. Now they had evidence. And Janelle, in her living room as the clip ran on her phone, wasn't heartbroken. She was serene. A tempest that had passed, not because it had ceased, but because the truth had finally arrived where it had always belonged, in the open. Meri read the transcript again, and again, and again. Every word was like a rock that settled on her chest. She'd endured Kody's silence, his coldness, his heartlessness, But to hear Robyn, the sister wife she once invited into her home with open arms, reduce her to a tragic Victorian ghost, that wasn't just heartless, it was intentional. Betrayal had acquired a voice, and it wasn't Kody's, it was Robyn's, cut, sneering, and dripping with self-righteousness. And somehow, that had hurt worse. With Kody, Meri had always anticipated abandonment. But with Robyn, she had hoped for sisterhood, for solidarity, for a shred of kindness. For years, Meri had lived on the fringes of a marriage that no longer had room for her. Her love was reciprocated with duty, her devotion greeted with silence, but she remained out of faith, fear, and inertia. Now she understood Robyn did not merely accept her silence. She profited from it. She constructed her throne from the backs of women too weary to resist. That was the game, and Meri had finally ceased playing. She pressed the keys on her laptop, the pressure of silent years bearing down upon her hands. No producers, no editors, just her voice. It shook, but it did not shatter. "I'm not a ghost," she whispered, but with conviction. "And I'm not desperate. I was committed. I was deceived, and I lingered too long." She hesitated, looking past the screen, into the arena where trust once resided. And in that instant, Meri chose herself, at last. "But I won't stay quiet anymore. You tried to erase me, but I still exist. I still matter." In that moment, Meri reclaimed something she hadn't felt in years, herself. Not the wife, not the background cast member, not the afterthought, just Meri. And if Robyn thought only Kody's confession had been caught on mic, she was wrong. The ripple effect was bigger. It spread through every silent corner of the family, and it shattered the calm they once used to hide the truth. Janelle sat at her kitchen counter, fingers trembling as she pressed play. The audio didn't shock her, not really. It was more like a nightmare she'd replayed in her head for years. But still, hearing the venom in Robyn's voice hit her hard. "Martyr complex," Robyn sneered. "So self-sufficient, but she can't even get Kody to text her back." Janelle didn't flinch. She laughed, a small, bitter sound, not because it was funny, but because finally, the lie was out in the open, exposed. For years, Janelle had been the rational one, the practical one, the steady, no-drama wife who adjusted and endured. She didn't chase attention. She didn't play victim. She held the family together quietly. And all that time, Robyn played queen behind the curtain. She cried when the cameras rolled. She pulled strings off screen. She sculpted herself into Kody's emotional home base while pushing the other wives into emotional exile. But now the curtain had dropped. The illusion had collapsed. Christine's call came through. "Have you heard it?" she asked. Her voice was tight, on edge. "I heard every word," Janelle whispered, and they didn't need to say anything more. The games, the manipulation, the false unity, it had all been dismantled by Robyn's own words. And in that moment, Janelle didn't feel broken. She felt free. It was like someone had cut the last thread that kept her tied to a lie. "It was never about love," she muttered. "It was about control, and now even he can't stomach her." There was no anger in her voice, just clarity. For the first time, she wasn't trying to figure out Kody's moods or wonder if he'd remember she existed. She was watching the tower fall from the outside, not buried under the rubble. And that changed everything, because once you stop justifying someone else's mistreatment, you stop being part of their narrative. You start writing your own. And in that moment, Janelle picked up the pen. Meanwhile, Meri stared out the window of her quiet B&B. A folded transcript sat beside a half-finished cup of tea. The words printed on the page felt heavier than anything Kody had ever said to her face. Tragic Victorian ghost. It wasn't just mean. It was erasure. She had heard harsh words before, from Kody, from fans, even from herself on lonely nights. But hearing it from Robyn, the one she once defended, the one she believed in, that broke something deeper. Her breath caught, not from heartbreak, but from something sharper. Beneath the grief, there was fury, not rage, not drama, just a low, steady burn. Meri had been pushed aside for years, used for appearances, tolerated, but never truly seen. And still, she stayed. She showed up. She kept the peace. She even convinced herself Robyn cared, that Robyn saw her as a sister. But now it was clear she was never a sister. She was a placeholder, someone to keep around until she wasn't needed anymore. Meri opened her laptop, not for a business post, not for a show promo. This time it was personal, it was raw, it was for her. "I'm not a ghost," she said, her voice calm, deliberate, "and I'm done performing silence. No tears, no dramatic exit, just the truth." And that was enough, because the deepest wound wasn't what Robyn said. It was that Meri believed, after all this time, that she mattered, that her loyalty counted, that decades of showing up would mean something in the end. But now the fantasy was gone, and in its place stood something stronger, not revenge, not bitterness, but resolve. Meri wasn't going to disappear, not this time. And Janelle? Her boots hit the pavement with purpose. No cameras, no producers, just her. A folded transcript in her pocket, a fire behind her eyes. She wasn't walking into a fight. She was walking into the truth. Because Robyn had called her a martyr with a complex. But what Robyn never understood is that martyrs don't fall apart. They rise after everything Janelle had endured, raising kids almost entirely on her own, surviving emotional neglect, and being part of a family that always put her last. Now she was being mocked by the very woman who had gained the most from her silence. The door opened. Robyn stood there, arms crossed, eyes puffy but distant. It wasn't grief Janelle recognized. It was self-pity. And Janelle had seen enough of that to last a lifetime. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Meri followed, steady and silent. They didn't speak until they were seated at the old wooden table, the same one where they'd once held holiday dinners and tense family meetings. But today, that table wasn't a symbol of togetherness. It was a battlefield. Janelle's voice broke the silence, sharp, calm, and unforgiving. "You don't get to cry and play the victim while mocking the women who built this family." Robyn flinched. Meri followed, her voice unsteady but strong. "You called me desperate. You thought I wouldn't find out. Say it to my face now." Robyn stumbled over her words. Her usual carefully crafted sincerity was gone. What followed wasn't an argument. It was a reckoning. Janelle didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her calm was more powerful than fury. She spoke plainly about the years of being minimized, the sacrifices overlooked, the grief swallowed quietly. Robyn tried to defend herself, but it was clear she wasn't sorry. She was just cornered. And for the first time, no one rushed to shield her. This wasn't a reality show. This was real. Outside, the air was colder than expected. Meri pulled her shawl tighter, and Janelle exhaled a breath she didn't even know she'd been holding. The confrontation hadn't ended in apologies. There were no hugs, no promises to heal. But something had shifted, something important, a release, a liberation. For the first time in decades, they weren't competing for Kody's approval. They weren't bending themselves to fit a family structure that never held them properly. They weren't playing roles in a show that had outlived its purpose. They had finally spoken, not just to Robyn, but to themselves. Inside, Robyn slumped at the table. Her tears came now, not for manipulation, not for defense, but in disbelief. She was left with her own words, words she thought no one would ever hear, words that once gave her control, now turned to chains. There was no way to spin it, not this time. Her husband had heard it. He heard her mock the same women he once claimed were his spiritual partners. And worse, he hadn't stood up for her. Not really, not anymore. Miles away, Cody listened to the audio again. He said nothing, no anger, no excuses, just the slow, bitter realization. The empire he built, on emotional debts and strategic silence, had collapsed from within. The wives weren't turning on him, they were turning away, leaving the script, rewriting the story. He hadn't just lost a marriage or a TV show, he had lost the illusion of control. Janelle and Mary didn't look back as they walked to their cars. For too long, their strength had been buried beneath polite smiles and unspoken pain. Now, in the wake of betrayal, they stood taller, not because they were healed, but because they were finally honest. They weren't wives anymore. They were witnesses, survivors, and they weren't asking for a seat at the table anymore. They were flipping the table over. The aftermath didn't come with drama. It came with quiet, a kind of stillness they hadn't felt in years. For Robyn, it was the sound of her own breath echoing in a house that used to hum with family chaos. Her phone stayed dark. No more calls from producers. No more texts from sister wives asking about birthdays or holidays. Just silence. The isolation had finally caught up. For years, she spun herself into the center of a universe, held together by borrowed affection and choreographed grace. But universes collapse when gravity fails. And Cody's silence? That was gravity, gone. He hadn't left her. But something had. The pedestal she stood on had cracked beneath her feet. She remembered his words. My defense of you is over. Not rejection. Something worse. Detachment. The man who once rewrote family rules to fit her now couldn't even meet her eyes, and that terrified her more than the other wives ever had. Meri returned to her quiet bed and breakfast in Parowan. Not victorious, not even relieved, just different. She poured herself a cup of tea and let it go cold. But this time, she didn't wait for someone else to drink it with her. She drank it herself. Janelle went home to a different kind of silence. Not the bitter kind. The kind that comes when you're finally alone with your choices and don't regret them. Her kids texted her memes. She laughed out loud. It was simple, but it was enough. Online, the clip kept spreading. Reddit, Instagram, YouTube. But for the women who lived it, virality didn't matter. The power wasn't in the leak. It was in what came after. They didn't just expose Robyn, they reclaimed their voices. Cody didn't just lose his grip, he finally saw what that grip had cost. And somewhere inside that reckoning,